Fire Joe is betrayed and captured by Russia. Lioness Season 3 Episode 3 Full Spoiler Recap. Warning, major spoilers ahead. What if the greatest threat to America isn't an army waiting at the border, but an enemy already sitting inside the country's most powerful institutions? That is the terrifying question at the center of Lioness Season 3, Episode 3, titled, The Bear is Infected. This episode slows down the explosive action from the opening episodes and instead takes us deep into a dangerous intelligence game involving Russia, Ukraine, the CIA, compromised American officials, and one massive question: who betrayed Joe? And by the end of the episode, we discover something even more disturbing. Joe isn't simply investigating a Russian operation. Joe has become the target. So let's break down the entire episode from beginning to end. The episode opens with Joe's family in danger. The episode begins with the consequences of the attack on Joe's home still hanging over the family. Joe's daughters are terrified. They have now seen firsthand what their mother's job can bring to their front door, and they don't understand why she continues to put herself, and them, in danger. They want Joe to quit. For them, this isn't about patriotism or duty anymore. It's about their mother coming home alive. Joe, however, refuses to walk away. She explains that she is a soldier and that somebody has to do the work she does. She also makes it clear that quitting the CIA wouldn't necessarily make the danger disappear. The enemy already knows who she is. The wall separating Joe's professional life from her family has officially collapsed. And Joe understands that better than anyone. She even prepares her husband Neil for the possibility that he may have to protect the family himself. This scene is important because Joe isn't simply fighting Russia anymore. She's fighting to preserve her family while continuing to operate inside a war that has become deeply personal. Oleksandra becomes the center of the investigation. The story then moves back into the intelligence operation surrounding Oleksandra Balakin, the Ukrainian operative who has become one of the CIA's biggest questions. Joe and her team believe Oleksandra may have played a role in exposing Joe. After all, information surrounding the operation eventually led to the attack on Joe's home. So the CIA needs answers. And they aren't gentle about getting them. Oleksandra is interrogated while American operatives put pressure on her through her family. The message is simple: tell us the truth, or your family could suffer. But Oleksandra refuses to simply accept the accusation. She insists she did not betray Joe. And as the interrogation continues, she begins explaining what she believes is actually happening. Her explanation completely changes the direction of the investigation. Oleksandra reveals the real Russian strategy. Oleksandra explains that Russia's strategy isn't necessarily to defeat America through a conventional war. Instead, Russia wants to weaken America from within. This leads to the episode's central metaphor. America is represented as the bear. Russia is the wolf pack. China is represented as the tiger. The idea is that neither Russia nor China can simply destroy the United States on its own. The bear is too powerful. So how do you defeat something stronger than you? You don't attack it head-on. You infect it. You introduce a disease that slowly spreads through the body. And according to Oleksandra, that's exactly what Russia has been doing. Foreign intelligence operatives have allegedly been compromising American officials through manipulation, seduction, blackmail and influence. The goal isn't necessarily to control everyone. The goal is to create enough compromised people that the system becomes vulnerable. And suddenly, Joe's investigation becomes much bigger. This isn't just about the person who exposed her. There may be an entire network operating inside America. Russia may have American officials working for it. Aleksandra's intelligence is one of the most disturbing developments in the episode. She gives the CIA information about Americans allegedly connected to Russian intelligence. And the list isn't limited to minor government employees. It reportedly reaches people with significant political influence, including 5 U.S. senators. That changes everything. Because if the information is true, the CIA isn't dealing with a normal spy operation. It's dealing with a potential institutional crisis. Publicly exposing those officials could create chaos. People could lose faith in their government. Political institutions could become paralyzed. And that may actually be part of Russia's strategy. The disease doesn't have to destroy the bear physically. It only needs to make the bear stop trusting itself. Joe starts to see the bigger picture. Joe is still skeptical. She doesn't suddenly trust Oleksandra completely. Joe has survived too many intelligence operations to take information at face value. But Oleksandra's explanation gives Joe something she desperately needs, a possible way to identify the Russian network. Instead of chasing individual agents, Joe wants to force the network to reveal itself. And this is where Joe's experience becomes critical. She realizes that if Russia has people operating inside America, those people will react whenever something important happens. So the CIA needs to create an event that forces the network to move. And Joe comes up with a dangerous plan. The CIA decides to use a Russian agent as bait. Oleksandra proposes using the capture of a high-level Russian intelligence figure as bait. The CIA can announce that they have captured Alexei Yurimov, an important Russian operative. But there's a catch. They don't necessarily have to reveal all the details. They only need to announce enough information to make the Russian network panic. Once the news becomes public, the compromised Americans and Russian contacts will start communicating. And when they communicate, the CIA can watch them. Joe understands exactly how dangerous the plan is. But she also knows that conventional investigation may not be enough. So instead of waiting for the enemy to make a mistake, Joe wants to force the enemy to move. Kyle and Cruz learn a harsh lesson. The episode also continues developing the relationship between Kyle and Cruz. Cruz is learning what it really means to operate inside the Lioness world. It's not simply about shooting the enemy. It's about lying, manipulating, reading people, knowing when someone is telling the truth, and sometimes using someone's family or emotions against them. Kyle understands that Cruz is becoming more capable, but he also knows that every step deeper into this world changes her. The episode therefore isn't just about Russia, it's also about the transformation of the people fighting this war. Cruz is learning from Joe. And Joe is beginning to realize that Cruz may eventually have to carry responsibilities similar to the ones Joe carries now. The family problem gets worse. Back home, Joe's family continues struggling with the consequences of her work. Her daughters want a normal mother. They want safety. They want to believe that the nightmare is over. But Joe knows it isn't. The attack on their home proved that the enemy has already crossed the line. Joe tells her family that she can't simply stop being who she is. And emotionally, this is one of the most important moments in the episode. Because Joe isn't choosing between the CIA and her family anymore. She's trying to protect her family through her CIA work. But the irony is brutal. The more she fights the enemy, the more attention she brings to herself. And that eventually becomes her greatest weakness. The White House gets involved. Joe's plan eventually moves toward the White House. The CIA wants an official announcement about the supposed capture of the Russian operative. The purpose is deception. They want Russian intelligence to believe that one of their important people has fallen into American hands. Then they want to watch what happens. Who calls whom? Who panics? Who suddenly changes behavior? Who tries to intervene? The CIA is essentially throwing a piece of bait into a lake and waiting to see what surfaces. But Joe doesn't realize just how dangerous the game has become. Because there is another player watching her. The meaning of "the bear is infected." This is where the title becomes extremely important. The bear represents America. The infection represents the foreign influence spreading through American institutions. The episode is saying that America doesn't necessarily need to be defeated in battle. If its institutions can be corrupted, if officials can be compromised, if citizens stop trusting their government, if intelligence agencies begin suspecting each other, then the country can begin destroying itself from the inside. That makes this one of the most politically and psychologically intense episodes of the season. The enemy isn't standing outside the gate. The enemy may already be inside the building. But then the episode changes everything. For most of the episode, viewers are watching Joe investigate the Russian network. We see the interrogation. We see Oleksandra's information. We see the CIA formulate its trap. We see the White House announcement being prepared. Everything seems to be moving toward Joe successfully identifying the people working with Russia. Then the episode suddenly jumps forward. And that's when the entire story changes. Joe is revealed to be in captivity. The final moments are shocking. Joe is shown imprisoned. She is restrained and unable to escape. She is being psychologically tortured. And perhaps the most disturbing part is what her captors make her watch. The American press conference announcing the capture of the Russian operative is playing in front of her. The same announcement Joe helped design. The same trap she believed would expose Russia. Now it's being used against her. That changes the meaning of everything we just watched. Joe thought she was setting the trap. But somewhere along the way, Joe became the bait. Why did Russia capture Joe? The episode doesn't completely answer that question yet. But it strongly suggests that Joe's capture is connected to the intelligence operation we've been watching. Her enemies know how valuable she is. They know she understands CIA operations. They know she is connected to some of America's most sensitive intelligence. And they know that Joe has one enormous weakness: she cares deeply about her family and her team. That gives Russia leverage. Joe has spent years operating in the shadows. Now she's the one trapped in the dark. The psychological torture begins. The final scene isn't about an explosion. It isn't about a gunfight. It's about breaking Joe psychologically. She is forced to watch the same information repeatedly. She cannot control what she sees. She cannot escape. And the constant dripping of water makes the situation even more disturbing. Her captors aren't simply trying to hurt her physically. They're trying to exhaust her. They're trying to make her lose control. They're trying to discover how much pressure it takes to break the Lioness. And that's terrifying because we've spent 3 seasons watching Joe break other people. Now somebody is trying to break her. Was Oleksandra really telling the truth? This becomes one of the biggest questions going into the next episode. Oleksandra appears to be providing valuable intelligence. She claims Russia has infiltrated American institutions. She provides names. She proposes the trap. And she seems to genuinely want to expose the Russian network. But can Joe trust her? That's still unclear. Even the actress playing Oleksandra has indicated that viewers should continue questioning the character's true allegiance. And that's exactly what makes her so interesting. She could be one of the CIA's most valuable assets. Or she could be playing a much deeper game. Who actually betrayed Joe? The episode deliberately refuses to give us a simple answer. Was it Oleksandra? Was it an American official? Was it someone inside the CIA? Was it someone close enough to Joe to know exactly where she lived? Or is the truth even bigger than that? The fact that Russian operatives were able to identify and target Joe suggests that someone had access to extremely sensitive information. And that's why the idea of an internal infection is so frightening. Joe may not have been betrayed by one person. She may have been exposed by a network. Joe's biggest mistake may have been trusting the system. Joe has always believed in controlling the battlefield. She studies the enemy. She creates contingencies. She prepares for betrayal. But this episode introduces a completely different kind of threat. What happens when the enemy understands your system better than you understand theirs? Joe created the trap. The CIA created the announcement. The White House delivered the message. But somehow, Joe ends up chained in captivity. That means somebody may have understood the operation from the inside. And if that's true, Joe's enemies could be much closer than she realizes. The ending explained. The final scene is essentially a flash forward. The events involving Oleksandra and the CIA's plan take place before the moment we see Joe imprisoned. So when we see Joe being tortured, we're seeing the future consequences of the operation. This explains why Joe's captivity doesn't contradict the earlier scenes. The story is deliberately moving between timelines. The CIA is preparing the trap, while the audience already knows that, at some point, the trap goes horribly wrong. That's what makes the ending so effective. We know Joe gets captured. But we don't yet know exactly how it happens. And we don't know who is responsible. What happens next? The next episode should focus heavily on the consequences of the CIA's trap. Joe is now the most important piece on the board. The CIA will have to figure out where she is and who is holding her. But rescuing Joe won't be simple. Because if the Russians really have access to compromised American officials, then launching a rescue operation could expose even more of the network. And that's the dilemma. Do you risk everything to rescue Joe? Or do you protect the larger operation? For Joe's family, there will be no question. They will want her home. For the CIA, however, the calculation could be much colder. Final thoughts. Episode 3 completely changes the direction of Lioness Season 3. What began as a story about an attack on Joe's home has become a much larger intelligence conspiracy. Russia isn't simply trying to kill American operatives. It may be trying to compromise the institutions protecting America. And Joe has walked directly into the middle of it. Oleksandra may have given the CIA the information needed to expose the network. But she may also have given Russia another opportunity to manipulate the Americans. Joe's decision to use a fake Russian capture as bait could become one of the most dangerous decisions of her career. Because while Joe believed she was hunting the enemy may have been hunting her. And the final image of Joe chained in captivity confirms the worst possible outcome. The Lioness has been caught. But the real question now is, who betrayed Joe, and how deep does the Russian infection really go? Because if the enemy is already inside America's institutions, rescuing Joe may be only the beginning of the war. And this time, Joe may not be the hunter. She may be the target.